Well, good morning. Bob Kerrigan with you here on the Law Show. We appreciate you watching. We're here every Sunday morning and we talk about the law. We don't represent people like the old general practitioners do, physicians that can kind of handle a little bit of everybody. Lawyers just can't do that anymore. The fields are more and more complex, more and more subtleties are involved in each field, and if you don't regularly practice in that field, it's dangerous to just embark on it. For example, if someone called me and said, "Would you draft a will for me and do some trust documents and help me with estate planning?" I could say yes. I took estate planning when I was in law school. I understand something about it. I have read the statutes that are involved. I've not read every case that's been decided. So I would be probably short, not helping the client to undertake that, even though the lawyer may need that compensation. The lawyer may not be skilled enough to undertake it, and in that instance, that example I gave, I wouldn't be. Although I have a dangerous level of knowledge about it, I could make a mistake. Be something that's new, something that's just been enacted, some IRS ruling, something that would affect estate planning, and therefore I would not be skilled enough to undertake that. It's difficult to stay abreast of everything in even the limited number of fields that we are involved in. Our practice is involved primarily with injury and death claims from various sources and various ways that people encounter bad outcomes and accidents, whether it's an automobile. That's more typically what lawyers do in this work, but we handle products liability cases, medical malpractice cases, and then the catastrophic injuries that come from commercial transportation, from private airplane crashes, railroad accidents, and just everything. Farm accidents. We've had many cases through the years involving farm equipment that has either malfunctioned or has been operated in a negligent way that's caused someone to be injured or harmed. To give you just like an overview of how this works, if you are employed by a company and you are injured by a fellow employee of the company, your claims are limited to a workman's compensation claim. And the reason we have workman's compensation claims is that we don't want employees suing their employers when they're injured on the job. As a matter of our public policy, we don't want employees going around suing their employers. Okay, it's just bad policy. There are instances, however, when you're injured on the job where a third party may be responsible in whole or in part for the injury that you have sustained. It could be an independent contractor, for example, working with your employer. It could be that your employer has elected not to have workman's compensation coverage, and in that event, sometimes an employee has to sue their employer. And it can also be from a dangerous aspect of where they work. It could be a dangerous product, for example, that has contributed. Generally a dangerous condition that the employer has allowed to develop is not a basis to sue the employer generally, because it's covered under the broader umbrella of workman's compensation. But in order to assess whether you have a claim involving workman's compensation or not, and generally the workman's compensation damages are very, very small or limited compared to the damages you might be able to recover against a responsible party, third party, whether it's an independent contractor or against the manufacturer of the product that was defective that caused you to be injured. Those damages are generally more because they are not limited by law. Workman's compensation damages are limited by law. And the reason is we want a system, this is the theory anyway, I'm not sure it works that way in real life, but in theory anyway, we want employees to be able to be compensated quickly and not to lose their wages or lose or not be in a position where they couldn't pay their medical bills. We want those to be paid right away, regardless of fault. In other words, even if it's the employee's fault that they got injured or caused their injury, then we want a system where that employee is going to be compensated for their medical bills and to receive some portion of their lost wages. That's the workman's compensation system. So just a brief word about that. We've had some emails about, okay, how does workman's comp work and why do I have to go to workman's comp? Why can't I just sue my employer? So hopefully that addressed that question. We also had an interesting text message sent to us where a texter, and we don't ask people's names, we just respond to their text, asked about their individual insurance. Well, we can't really provide good advice to an individual because we don't know their circumstances, but generally this is what the texter said, that they had $300,000 per claim, per person, $500,000 per claim, uninsured motorist coverage, bodily injury protection and uninsured motorist coverage, and wanted to know if that was adequate. Well, it's very hard to know if it was adequate. That's very substantial insurance. But let's say that the person has property and an estate valued at $50 million. Well, if you only have $300,000 per person, $500,000 per claim, and you injure a number of people in an accident, 5 or 6 people, all catastrophically injured. Hope that never happens to anybody. We have seen it in our practice. And if that happens, you could be exposed to millions and millions of dollars in damages. Now, if you have and are a very solvent person and have substantial assets, you need more insurance than a person of modest means. A person that owns their own home, for example, owns their car, has a modest savings plan or 401k or whatever, but a modest amount of assets, and you have $300,000/500,000 insurance, you have plenty of insurance because no lawyer is going to go after your personal assets. In fact, they can't reach your homestead anyway, but it's very likely the lawyer will settle whatever claims they have within that insurance policy limit. So when the texter asked, do I have enough? I posed that question. What kind of assets are you seeking to protect? And perhaps should consider what's called an umbrella policy, which is an additional layer of insurance over your primary insurance of $300/500, $300 per person, $500 per claim. And that means if there are 6 or 7 people injured in the accident, $500 is all the insurance company is going to have to pay for everybody. All of their claims have to be handled within that $500,000, but an umbrella picks up over that $500. And generally umbrella policies are issued at $1 million or $2 million or $5 million, depending on the needs of the person. But there's another component to this that I want everybody to understand because it can protect your family. Here's how it works. Let's say you are a person of modest means, you own your home, you have a small savings account or a 401k, you own a couple of vehicles and maybe a boat, but you don't have a lot of assets. You might still, if you can afford it, buy that $300/500 policy for this reason. It can protect you and your family with uninsured motorist coverage. The most important insurance you can buy from your automobile insurance seller is uninsured motorist coverage. So if you can afford the premium to buy substantial BI coverage, bodily injury coverage, you want uninsured motorist coverage in the same amount. Now the law says you get that uninsured motorist coverage in the same amount of your BI coverage unless you reject it. Never, ever, ever reject uninsured motorist coverage. Cardinal rule, don't reject it because that uninsured motorist coverage protects you. So we had another texter, and this texter asked, I've got Medicare, And my insurance agent says, I don't need uninsured motorist coverage because all they're going to be able to get if they sue me are the medical expenses. Well, that is completely wrong. I don't know how someone could misunderstand the nature of insurance to that point. Medicare is irrelevant to the question of protecting your family with uninsured motorist coverage. And then the texter wrote back and said, oh, I understand it. That's where all these big awards come. It has nothing to do with the level of your injury. The award that's made or determined by a jury is a function of how badly the person is injured. And let's say, for example, Grandpa's injured in an accident and the injury precludes him from picking up a grandchild, hugging the grandchild, holding the grandchild at all. Let's say there's a paralysis injury or a bad spinal injury or something like that. Well, your loss of the capacity to enjoy that wonderful grandpa and grandma years, it deserves compensation to some extent. And juries look at that and determine, all right, you've lost this. How can we compensate the person for that loss in a way that's reasonable under the circumstances and maybe allow for some additional things for grandpa and grandma to do, which is take the kids to Disney World every year or do things that they could never, ever afford. And so these kinds of damages are disparagingly referred to by insurance company as pain and suffering. Well, it came from the jury instruction that talks about the pain and the suffering of a person. But a jury determines what's fair under the circumstances for this retired gentleman or retired grandma. What's fair under the circumstances to compensate her for this terrible injury that she sustained? She's already gotten her medical bills paid. So what can we do as a jury that's fair to them? Because the person that caused the accident is at fault. Grandma and grandpa didn't do anything wrong, and now their life has been irreparably damaged as a result of the negligence of a person. So that's how uninsured motorist coverage can protect your family. I'm amazed at the number of people who will come to us and say, I was told I didn't need it because I had medical payments coverage, or because I'm on TRICARE, or because I'm on Medicare, or because I have Medicaid, or because the moon's made of blue cheese or something. Whatever the reason was wrong, whatever the reason that was given to them was given to them by somebody who didn't know what they're talking about. And so you want uninsured motorist coverage across the board. Absolutely get it. Finally, this. What about stacked coverage? What does stacked coverage mean? Stacked coverage means if you have 2 or 3 cars, it's stacked in terms of your uninsured motorist coverage benefits. So if you have 300/500 and you have 2 cars, you actually have 600/1 million in coverage. That's called stacked coverage. When we come back after this short break, I want to talk about marijuana and the misunderstanding that it is harmless and that it should be legalized without understanding some of the medical issues that we know about today. We'll be right back.